So it's awesome to finally have you on our little YouTube channel here.
It's my honor. You know, it's funny when you reach out and ask. I'm like, heck yeah, sign me up. Where do I show up?
First, I just want to talk a little bit about your career,
Yeah.
and then just going from there. So let me do.
Well, it's interesting. I always wanted to make movies as a kid, and you know, I'm a child of the '70s, and all of these amazing things were happening in the '70s in terms of movies coming out in the theater. I mean, Jaws, Logan's Run, Star Wars, Superman, Alien, Dawn of the Dead. I mean, these were seminal moments of my young childhood, and somehow I convinced people to I'm like, Dad, take me to see Dawn of the Dead. And he was like, it says here no one under 17 admitted. I'm like, oh, that's just what they say in the paper. And of course, you know, he took me and got me in. He's like, he takes me to the box office, and they're like, sir, we don't allow, you know, children to see this movie. My dad's like, his mother's already inside waiting for him, and they let me in. So there I was seeing things, you know, the kind of graphic violence I shouldn't have seen. But I was a huge movie fan, and I had a Super 8 camera, and I was reading Starlog and Fangoria and their sister magazine Cinemagic, and every time an issue of Cinemagic came out, you had to try one of the techniques, like here's a stop motion animation technique, and you would do that. And so I always wanted to make films, but I think what happened was the VCR came out. Now people are like, well, that's the ancient times.
What's a VCR?
But yeah, and it was the idea that I've tried to explain this to people before, but if you were a movie fan, normally when Wizard of Oz played on CBS once a year, it was a huge deal. And everybody would watch it in every household. Sunday night, tonight on the ABC Sunday night movie, Sean Connery is James Bond. And every kid would watch it. But the funny thing is not every kid could stay up to 11 because they were long movies. But we would talk about it the next day at school. And these were communal or a countrywide events. And it was a huge deal. So as a kid I was obsessed with Star Trek and science fiction. I was obsessed with Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, when I was 5 and 6 years old. And people talk about young adult novels now. I'm thinking, well, my young adult was Star Trek, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and you know, all the movies that I saw back then. And they led me to read comic books and to listen to music and read. I mean, it was very funny. I remember going to my mother, and it was after Star Wars had come out in May, and I had just turned 10, and I said, Mom, I want to join the science fiction book club. And my mom's like, yeah, you can get 4 books. It's like $5 and you get 4 books, and you just have to buy 1 a month or something. And my mom's like, you want to join a book club? And I'm like, yeah, Mom. And she's like, fine, here's my money, take it. Because what 10-year-old kid wants to, and join a book club? And so there was all of this stuff going on culturally that fueled, I don't know why I loved science fiction, fantasy, and horror when I was a kid. I don't know. I mean, I guess I was born that way. But I was obsessive about it. I remember when B. Joe Trimble's Star Trek Concordance came out, and it had all the episode names in it, and I'm like, oh my God, I have to memorize. And I would sit there and read it while Star Trek was on every night in Seattle from 6 o'clock to 7 on weeknights. And I would learn all of the episode titles and everything. It was all, and the fact that you could go get the blueprints and buy model kits, and it was all a continuum. And yet you had to work for it. You couldn't there was no website, there was nothing. There was no internet. So if you wanted this stuff, you had to go get it. You had to take buses or have your parents drive you. And if movies would come out, I knew that, movies came out Friday, and the entertainment section, you get the newspaper and unfurl it, and all the ads were big, and you'd have to then go beg your parents. My parents had a standing rule. They're like, we'll drive one way, but you have to find someone to pick you up, or we'll, and they never would. I could never find friends' parents because my friends' parents were not as insane about all of this stuff as I was. So my parents would have to listen to me like for weeks. I'd see an ad for Logan's Run on TV. I'm like, we have to go. We have to go. I have to see this movie. And so half the time, even though my parents said that I had to have somebody pick us up, I couldn't find someone, but they would do it. They drive me both ways just to shut me up. And so, you know, and then I started making Super 8 films. And when I turned 13, there was video stores were a weird, strange place. And I started working there. And these guys, I was 13 years old. I used to take this bus and go to this video store called Video Space, which was in Bellevue, Washington. And it was like the only video store in Seattle where I grew up. And I would just hang out and like pick up the movies and like look at them. And I had a VCR, but back then the way it worked was you'd have to buy a movie for like 50 or 60 bucks. And back in 1980, that was a lot of money for a kid, you know, and I would save money up because of my bar mitzvah money or whatever. And it's a big deal, but you could keep it for a month and then you'd bring it back. And for $10, you could trade it and get another brand new movie. So that's kind of what I would do. And finally they're like, kid, why don't you work here? And the first job I ever had, I was 13, totally probably illegal.
Yeah.
but I was talking to guys who loved movies, and they were awesome. It was two dudes, Bud Warner and Steve Pitcher, and they would show me things and tell me what to watch. And so I always wanted to make films. And then as I got older, you know, in junior high and high school, I wrote a film column for my high school newspaper. And I always wanted to make movies. And I went to a local college in Washington State called the Evergreen State College. And then I transferred to USC and took film courses, and it was amazing. And then while I'll tell you, here's a cautionary, or maybe not a cautionary tale, but so I had a 2-credit class that was taught by a professor named Max Lamb, and it was called the Visiting Artists Seminar. And he would bring working industry professionals into the class, people like Joel Schumacher, you know, who directed Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, but he also directed like The Lost Boys and Flatliners and things like that. So he would bring these people to class, and they would speak for 3 hours. And our class was only like 15 people. But it was USC, so people would come down. So I thought, I'm like, well, you know, if he's going to bring these people down, I would go and do research. And I would go to the Motion Picture Academy Library on Doheny. And the Academy Library would every clip from a newspaper about an Academy member or a director or whatever, they would keep in like these manila envelopes or manila folders. So I would go and research everyone that was coming to class. So there were 2 producers, Mark Levinson and Scott Rosenfeld, who later executive produced Home Alone. And they had just made Mystic Pizza. So they were coming to our class, and I had done a lot of research, and basically became me talking to them for 3 hours because I had done research on them. And they had produced a science fiction film called Stranded. And the next day, they called my professor and said, we want to give that kid a job. And so my first job in the motion picture industry was basically working for them in their office. I was a production assistant, but what they allowed me to do is read screenplays. And it was the first time I read scripts, and they told me what they were looking for. And I'd never read screenplays before. And I read a script called The Grand Tour that was written by David Twohy, who went on to make the Riddick movies like Pitch Black and Chronicles of Riddick. And Riddick, he made like Below, and he wrote things like Warlock in the late 80s. And I read this script called The Grand Tour. It was later made as The Grand Tour Disaster in Time, and it was really good. And when it was the first script I said, here, you should read this. I thought it was good. They read it, and they're like, this is good. Clearly, you know what you're talking about, even though I was young. And I said, well, you know, I spent my life studying movies. And then it went from there. And they lost their deal because they had also produced Teen Wolf, and they were owed like $100,000, and Atlantic Releasing couldn't pay them. And I just kind of started there and jumped from place to place as one does. I went to Warner Brothers and worked in feature production for 2 years, and I worked for Joel Silver as a script reader. I went to Full Moon Entertainment and started editing movies. And it was, you know, in the 90s in Hollywood, it was really interesting because you had Roger Corman making movies west of the 405, which is a freeway, close to the beach. And then you had Charlie Band making movies inland in San Fernando. And I worked for Charlie Band, and we were making like a movie a month, and it was incredible. And I just sort of learned my craft, and you would do anything you could do. And I'd worked on Army of Darkness, working for the makeup effects company. And I'd worked on, you know, other movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Leatherface as the art department assistant. And, you would do whatever you could on these productions and learn as much as you could learn. And then I learned that I didn't want to be a studio executive. I wanted to actually make films. So I started editing and post supervising. And through the late 90s, I did a lot of movies no one's ever heard of. And some aren't even on my IMDb, but it was still work. And then in 1999, my first feature came out that I wrote, actually my only feature that I wrote and directed, which was Free Enterprise, came out. And which just celebrated its 21st birthday on June 4th. So that was kind of how I started. I mean, it was a crazy long journey.
Wow. So did you, when you started working at Full Moon, is that when you started learning to edit or started editing?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. So the reason I started working at Full Moon, my friend Dan Schweiger, who I just talked to before I came on this podcast, I've known him now for 30 years. Dan calls me up and he says, listen, Full Moon made a movie called Arcade that was unreleasable because the visual effects were terrible. And it was about kids getting sucked into a video game and living in the virtual world. It was basically their ripoff of Tron. And it was unreleasable. And they had to release it. They owed Paramount a movie. They had an output deal with Paramount. They'd release a movie a month. So they had to finish this movie. And so the movie was originally cut and they dropped in these effects. And what they wanted was us to go rebuild that edit and we drop in the new effects. So I said, okay, you know, and Peter Billingsley, the star of A Christmas Story, Don't Shoot Your Eye Out, Kid, is now grown up, and he'd worked on Arcade as an actor, and he worked in post as the assistant editor. So Peter Billingsley and I were now working together. It was funny because I'd seen Christmas Story a million times, and it was hard to disassociate this actor from working on this movie. But the first day we're looking at all the footage, and I said to Peter, I go, you know, Peter, there's a much better movie here than what was cut together. He goes, I know, we cut the movie in like 10 days. And I said, well, if we're going to redo it, why don't we just recut the movie? And he said, well, that's not our mandate. And I said, yeah, but don't you want the movie to be better? You're in it. And he was like, well, okay. So I call up my friend Dan. I go, Dan, this movie's terrible. It's terrible. And not only is it terrible, but the footage that we have, it wasn't even used. The movie was cut so quickly that there's all this material that no one's ever seen. We should recut it and then drop in the effects. And he's like, he had a funny voice. He's like, hey, man, Rob, you know, what do you know about editing movies? I said, well, I got an A in my editing class at USC, and I've been editing like short films all my life, but I've never edited a feature film before. What do I know? And I said, but I think we can make it better. And so he checked with Charlie Band, and they said, okay, you guys recut the first 10 minutes of the movie. And if you like it, or if we like it, if you like it, submit it to us. And if we like it, then we'll approve more funds and you can recut the film. They loved it. They couldn't, by the way, they didn't just love it. They couldn't believe what we'd done. And I said, well, it was scripted. Like, it was already there. You know, we didn't do anything new. And so from then on, Peter and I spent about 6 months editing the film. We re-edited the whole film. And then as we were going along, Dan Schweiger was supervising the visual effects that we were getting. And it was funny because I would say to Peter, like, when they would go into the virtual world, there was like one video shot of an energy ball going around a corner. And I go, Peter, this is video. We're not finishing on film. So we can have the energy ball go around the corner like this, but then we can turn the shot and we can have it go because there's the rule of threes with film. And I'm like, so we turn one effect shot into three. And at first he was like, what? I go, no, watch. And we did it. And suddenly we created moments that didn't even exist with the effects. And so when they looked at what we had done, I think they were taken aback, but they let us do it. And not only did we edit the film, but then we also had to post-supervise the film and supervise a new sound mix and do all the work. And there was a post-production facility that we would go to that they were coloring the film elements. And when we didn't know something, we'd like take the guys out late night to pizza in North Hollywood. And there's a place called Little Tony's Pizza that was on the corner. So we'd get them a pitcher of beer and pizza, and we would have questions or written down or things that, and if we just asked them, they would think we were dumb because these are such rudimentary questions. And we'd be like, hey, it's like, there's one thing I've always wanted to know. How do you do like this? And then they'd be, oh, come on, well, let me tell you. And so all the questions we would want was kind of subterfuge. We would ask, and they would tell us the answers. And then so we sort of figured out our way and how do you post supervise the film once it's cut? How do you supervise the sound mix, the sound design, everything? And that's what we did. And we learned everything there was to know. And then for the rest of the 90s, I did various things, but I did edit a lot of really low budget movies for first time directors because I knew so much about post-production. So that's how my career really started. But I always wanted to write and direct.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you went to film school, is that what you set out for, was to be a director, or did you have a main goal in mind?
Well, I mean, for me, it was really about making movies, whatever that meant. And I knew that there were different roles when it came to production. But yeah, I always wanted to write and direct, but I also just liked, before I had got to that point, I had been a PA on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So I'd been on set and I watched, there's a whole microcosm of life that happens on a set. There's all kinds of different people with different kinds of skill sets. And I just know that I wanted to participate in whatever it was that they were doing. So vaguely, everyone's like, what I really want to do is direct. Yeah, I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a storyteller. But I also knew that when I started editing, like on Arcade, I realized how powerful editing was. And it was really fun, and it was really creatively gratifying. I mean, it was an amazing time. It was, I mean, once you start putting one image next to another and the images become something greater than the sum of their parts, they start telling the story. That's very, very intoxicating.
Yeah, I started with editing small little movies, indie movies, yeah. And that's right. I worked on a couple movies where it made if you just looked at footage, you made no sense of it. It didn't make any sense. Right. And you start putting those pieces together to make a story, and it's like, wow, we have a movie here now. I mean, editing is I love editing is a two-edged sword for me. I love it, but I also hate it.
It can be difficult. What I find interesting about being on movie sets, and I've been on a lot with my work as a DVD special features producer, I was embedded on movie sets for a long time, like Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings or Superman Returns or something. And one of the things you realize is most people, even the people working on a film, you'll be looking in Video Village and you'll see the shot that's being done. No one has any sense of what this is going to look like as a movie when you're on a set. They only see still images being captured. And so while you're shooting a movie, you can see if the performances are good and if the shots are good, but you have no sense of what the movie's going to be like when it's put together. Even when you're working on it, you're like, I wonder what this is going to be, because you shoot out of sequence and there's all this, it's craziness, and you just don't know. Yeah. And until you start getting into the edit bay where the magic happens, you're like, oh, you might put two shots that were shot 2 months apart together, but they're supposed to be at the same time. And suddenly you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then you have a story.
Yeah. Or it goes the other direction. And I remember seeing an interview with Quentin Tarantino, and he said he shot a short movie, went into edit bay, and editing it, and he realized he had nothing.
Yeah.
And then he had to I got to reshoot this.
Yep.
So you really don't know what you have until you start editing, as you said. You said you grew up in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We, Simon and I, we grew up in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh,
yeah.
I which is right next to Battleground. Battleground's next. I went to between my junior and senior year in high school, I went to a leadership camp for student body officials, like if you're on the ASB. And I met a girl from Battleground named Michelle Hollenbaugh, who I developed a mad crush on. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, but I'll never forget her. And I know she lived next to Vancouver, which is, as for people who don't know, it's very close to the border of Oregon.
Yeah. My whole family lives in Oregon, and we grew up in Vancouver. And then we moved from Vancouver when we were 19 to LA, actually Simi Valley is where we lived for about 10 years. And we dabbled in the business a little bit with editing and things like that. So then I moved here, and I moved from LA to Texas.
Wow.
It is a cultural shock, I'll tell you.
I'll bet.
Huge culture shock from the Pacific Northwest to Texas. But yeah, it's just crazy.
Do you live in Texas now?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, in Dallas area.
Mm.
Yeah. And actually, Austin has a huge independent circuit.
Yeah.
And it's slowly starting to go into Dallas now. And I get calls sometimes from some contacts saying, hey, I know this investor. If you need if you're working on a film, let me know, and we can try to get you a meeting with him. So yeah, it's the movie industry is growing here in Dallas. So you mentioned that you directed your first feature, Free Enterprise.
Yeah.
It celebrated 25 years.
21. It was 21 years old on June 4th.
Still no Blu-ray on that, huh?
No, I didn't pay for it, obviously. It's owned by someone else. But I'm hoping I need to raise some money, and I would like to get it. It's expensive. I mean, obviously it was shot on film, and in order to have a film scanned and cleaned properly, you're looking at basically $100,000 just to transfer it. And then there's a lot of other work you have to do as well. So I'm looking to raise money to do that, because I think I can make someone their money back. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to get it out. It's funny, another movie I produced, The Hills Run Red, comes out on June 16th on Blu-ray, and we made that in 2008, and it came out in 2009, but it was never released in HD. So that's coming out too. I'm proud of that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, obviously, but I'm very proud of the movie, and it was a long journey to get it made. And then when Scream Factory said they were going to put it out on Blu-ray, director Dave Parker and I created 6.5 hours of new special features. And there was all this footage I had shot in Bulgaria when we made the film that no one's ever seen, that you can now see on the new Blu-ray.
That's awesome. Actually, it's been a while since I saw Hills Run Red. And I remember I liked it a lot. I thought it was really creative how it was done.
It's pretty nasty. It's
yeah,
good.
yeah. I did want to ask one more question about Free Enterprise before we move more on to Hills Run Red. Casting William Shatner, the legend William Shatner. How did that come about, casting him?
Well, when we wrote the movie about him. And what was interesting, I don't recommend doing that. You never write a movie about an actor that you haven't paid yet. And when we originally wrote Free Enterprise, we had seen the movie Swingers, and what we were doing was we were doing a riff on Swingers. Like, what if we did a movie about what we consider ourselves cool LA sci-fi geeks, because we were writing for Sci-Fi Universe magazine and we were putting on events, and so we were pretty self-actualized geeks that were doing a lot of interesting stuff, and we had girlfriends and that kind of thing. And we're like, why don't we make a movie about that? And at the core of it was our love of Shatner, and how in the original film, Shatner was an imaginary friend. He was a character that would show up, and he was the dole out advice, wise pearls of wisdom. And so we wrote this, and we figured, why wouldn't he do it? Like, I didn't know Shatner, but we wrote this script. And when he read it, I mean, long story short, there's a lot in between, but he knew he'd raise the money to make it, and he kept saying no. And he said no 3 times. And then he finally called us on the phone. And he was like, look, guys, he didn't dig our film because he's like, you've written me as a god, as a deity. I've got problems. And we're like, what problems do you have? He's like, I've got daughters and ex-wives and women and money and the problems everybody has. And you've written me as somebody who's a deity, and I can't do it. And then he said something very funny. He said, I'm a fucked up guy. And if you were to rewrite the script and make me more real, I'll read it. I'm not saying I'm gonna do your movie, but I'll read it. So we rewrote the script and took out there's a little bit of the imaginary friend thing in the beginning of the movie still, but we basically reconceptualized the whole movie. And I think, to be honest, if I can critique my own work, one of the problems with Free Enterprise is once we did this rewrite, we weren't able to get the A and the B stories to come together. Mm. That's what I think is the great, like the Shatner story is one thing, and the girlfriends and the leading life in LA is another. And we really needed to bring those things together more. But in rewriting the script, we only had like Christmas break to come up with another script. And then when Shatner read that script, he goes, okay, I can do this. And he came on board the project, which was amazing. It was amazing.
Was it a little surreal that he said yes and working with him?
Dude, I'll tell you a funny, like he could never know we were Star Trek fans. He just could never know because he would never have worked with us. Mm-hmm. And he didn't know that not only were we were fanatical Star Trek fans, fanatical. And so there was one moment, I kid you not, we're sitting in his office, the phone rings, his assistant comes in and says, Ricardo Montalban is on the phone and needs to talk to you. And we're sitting, like we're on the couch in his office, and Shatner's behind his desk. He's like, hello, Ricardo. And then he's like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And they talked for like 10 minutes. And Mark, my compatriot, my coworker, the man who wrote the script with me and produced the movie, he's tapping on my shoulder and he's like, it's just like in Star Trek 2. They never meet. They just talk on the phone. And it was just like that. And we're just sitting there like little kids in a candy store watching William Shatner, Captain Kirk, talk to Khan on the phone. It was amazing.
Oh, but man, I can't imagine.
I mean, it was insane. And he could never know that we could never let him know. Mm-hmm. Because then he would have run away. He's like, you guys are crazy Star Trek fans? Not that all Star Trek fans are crazy, but
you got to keep your cool.
Yeah, we had to be cool the whole time.
Yeah.
And there was one time, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. So there was a line in the movie where we had mentioned the actress Jill Ireland, who was in a first season episode called This Side of Paradise. Mm-hmm. And Shatner was he said, guys, Jill Ireland was a lovely lady. She was married to Charles Bronson. She died of cancer. And maybe we should just refer to her as perhaps her character's name in the episode. And he's going, there's like these reference books. You can go out and find, like, I don't know the name of that character, but you could go out and go get a book, go down the bookstore and find the name and just replace Jill Ireland's name with the name of the character from that episode. And I'm diligently taking notes. And I'm just writing down, I'm like, all right, so we'll change her name to Leela Kalomi. And then I look at him, and Shatner's looking at me, and I'm like, Well, if that's the name of her character in that particular first season episode. And then I started writing again because I almost gave up. I gave up the gig right there. I was like, oh my God. And he was just like, right. Because he could never know.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, I'm sure he did know, because how could you read the script and not know? But it was a delight to work with him. A little intimidating because I'd never directed before, and he'd been directing, and he'd been an actor for 50 years. So what could I do? So it was intimidating, but you got to get over that real quick. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make your movie.
My brother Simon and I, we were huge fans of Femme Fatales. I don't know if you hear that enough.
I don't. As a matter of fact, hang on. I should wait. Here is of course, the full series DVD special edition. It's never come out on Blu-ray, which is sad because we did finish it in 2K.
How many episodes did you direct?
I directed five episodes of Femme Fatales, and boy, was that fun.
I bet. I mean, when I don't remember what the episode was, but I remember seeing one episode where it was a chase in the woods at night. And
I think that might have been my episode. It's called Help Me, Rhonda.
Yeah, that was it. And that scene always stood out to me, the way it was directed and shot, because it could have, having a filmmaker brain, I'm watching this thinking, this could have been a geographical mess for the viewer, not knowing who is where, what's really going on, filmed in the dark. With a show like that, I'm sure you don't have a whole lot of time filming those.
All I can say is it's funny you bring that particular scene up. So that scene was in the second episode I directed. It's in the first season of the series, and it's a sequel to the pilot episode. So in it was written as this big chase, and we had to shoot the climax, and we were in the woods, and there was a rope bridge, which is the reason we shot. We were at Cecil B. DeMille's hunting lodge. We had to shoot this big scene, and we didn't have time. We shot every one of those episodes in 3 days, which for those of you who know, every day was a 12-hour day. And we're shooting 30 minutes, but it was like we were shooting. It was an insane, impossible schedule. So there's no way you could ever make what you wanted to make. And what I said, they're like, we have to cut this scene. I'm like, no, we don't have to cut this scene, because they'd put a gigantic light on a crane, like a moonlight, simulated moonlight, over the climax over this rope bridge.
Oh, they originally wanted to cut that scene out because they didn't have time.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
We didn't have time. And I said, we don't have to cut it. And I said, all you have to do, and Roger Chingarian, our DP, who's amazing, he hated doing handheld. And I was like, let's just do some handheld. Like, because I knew that what you need are the shots that you can edit together. They don't all have to be beautiful. And in this particular case, you have a woman in lingerie in a gown running through the woods from a guy with a shotgun. And I said, all we need to do is basically 2 setups. And the setup is a camera position. So I'm like, all right, one setup will be here, and she'll run into frame, and she'll be chased, and we'll do handheld and just follow them, and we'll be there. And then the second position is we're going to go across the way where there's these trees, and then the girl will run up to the tree, and then she'll come around the tree and struggle, and then run the other way, and then the guy chasing her will do the same thing. So basically what I've been given is 4 or 6 different pieces of coverage, because when the girl runs past the camera, that's one piece of coverage. When the guy runs past the camera, and I have a shot where you actually see both of them in the frame. So we only had really 2 camera setups, but we could get multiple takes. And we banged that scene out in about 10 minutes.
Wow.
And everybody looked at me like I was crazy. But I edited all my episodes of Femme Fatales. There's a secondary editor credit on that, but most of the time I edited all my episodes myself, which in television is very unique. Because when I was shooting this, I knew exactly what we needed. Now, like you said, it was really difficult because we're literally shooting at night. There was no extra lights, but I knew that I could get enough pieces of coverage to get that, at least that running chase. And then they run down and they have this big scene over a rope bridge where the guy gets shot by the lesbian lover of our main character, and he falls off the bridge. And it was interesting because a lot of people, when you have no time to do something, nowadays it seems really easy because you can just grab a video camera and do it. But back in 2010, 2011, people didn't understand. And my DP was like, we can't do that. And I'm like, it doesn't even matter if the focus is buzzed or not, because a la Blair Witch or Saving Private Ryan, people get that technique. They understand. So I was able to do that in literally like it was probably like 15 minutes, but that was all I had. And I was able to get 6 pieces of coverage and 2 setups in 15 minutes, which is insane.
Wow.
And the only reason I was able to do that is because we already had a crane with a giant moonlight, simulated moonlight on it. So everything was already lit. So that was how I was able to do that. So it's funny that you bring that up because it was something people told me I couldn't do.
Wow.
You know, like, you can't, it's not going to work. And I got a lot of that on that episode. It was a very talky episode, and it was very difficult to do, actually.
It was just, I just love the way it was directed and the way it was shot.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, you know, what's funny about that was the president of HBO Films actually called me. I was at WonderCon, which is a convention here in LA. I was at WonderCon, and Mark was there, and he handed me the phone. It was the president of HBO Films. And he goes, I want to tell you, that was my favorite episode of the first season. And I think what's interesting, I didn't write it. You know, I took it, and it was hard to do for a number of reasons. It was a really hard episode to do. But I think it was the closest to what the show was supposed to be, which was obviously Cinemax, as we know, Skinemax, they want a softcore show, just people having simulated sex. Well, that was never what we wanted to do. We wanted to make a crime thriller anthology. Now, the show was sold based on the sex. They're like, and they would literally they'd be like, we need 90 seconds of bare breasts. I would literally get that message. I'm sitting in the edit bay trying to make these scenes work. The last thing I'm thinking about, not that beautiful bare breasts aren't beautiful, but I'm like, I'm trying to tell a story and trying to, you know, make this. And they're like, we don't care about the story. We just want, and so I would literally sometimes have to extend scenes. And in that particular episode, there wasn't enough nudity in it. There wasn't enough sex. So they literally brought the actress back and they shot. And if you watch the episode, there's this very long sequence where she's nude in a shower crying. Well, I didn't direct that. That was done after the episode was finished. It wasn't scripted, so we didn't shoot it. And when you watch the episode, it just comes to a screeching halt during that scene because there's no story being told. It's literally just a naked girl on the floor of the shower crying. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, we had to, the studio made us, Cinemax and HBO made us put this in, so we had that much. So it was making the show was both fun and creatively challenging, but also pretty silly and ludicrous when you get those back, because the studio wanted a late night show where people were having a lot of sex, and we're like, but we're trying to make crime thriller stories, and they're like, well, give us both. So we were constantly at odds with one another about what we were trying to do.
The executives are like, it's called Skinemax for a reason.
Yeah, totally.
Not Crimemax.
I know, that's exactly right. I'm like, well, then why did we thought we were getting something else. We want Skinemax, not Crimemax. I mean, that's exactly, you nailed it. That was the crux of doing the show. But, you know, it ran 2 seasons. It was a lot of fun. And then Cinemax played it for years after that. It was on like every day. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. And you saw, you held up that DVD.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I always go on Amazon, try to see if I can find a copy of it. And it's either too expensive or they don't have it. And
yeah, it's such a weird, I mean, I got it because they sent me one, and it's so weird. As a DVD producer, I didn't work on this disc very much, and but you know, the films are there, the episodes are there, and I have to say, I mean, I had a really fun time making the show, and everybody on it everybody, the guys and the girls, everybody who worked on the show, I had such a good time with. Everybody was so game and so much fun, and it was very fun. It was such a good time. And
Yeah.
it's so funny because people will tell you, they'll poo-poo your work, like, it's just Skinamax. And I'm like, yeah, but for episodes that were shot in 3 days, we tried to make them as good as they could be. And there's of my 5 episodes, there's 3 I'm very actually proud of. And if you look at them within the paradigm of what they were made and what they were supposed to be, I could sit there and go, look what I did. A lot of people are like, you should have been doing Basic Instinct for the theaters. I'm like, yeah, I would love that, but with the parameters of making a show that costs a couple of $100,000 every episode that we're shooting in 3 days, I think we did a good idea, or a good job. And a lot of people, that's the story of my life. People have never understood why I'm so satisfied with the work that I do. And I'm like, because I'm able to see it through. Like, even though I might be working on a low budget movie like Arcade, we're able to put our all in it and turn it into, it's never going to be Gone with the Wind, so to speak, that's in the news today, but it's never going to be that. And yet, for what it's going to be, if we're going to make a low budget, micro budget movie, we can at least make it from, like Arcade went from being unwatchable to being really mediocre. And we were proud of that mediocrity. It took us a long time. And it was nominated in 1993 for Best Independent Direct-to-Video Release of the Year. So I was like, all right, I'll take that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure with your work in indie films, you get the sense of that when you're working on a very tight schedule, very tight budget, and it's extremely gratifying, and you're very proud of yourself. Hey, we did this. Look how great this actually turned out, when it could have been a huge mess.
Right. And not worked at all.
Yeah. And I think unless you've worked in the indie circuit, you really don't fully understand that.
No. And it's weird, now that I'm in the YouTube pundit space, and I've been talking on YouTube for 5 years about movies and things, most of the people that I work with haven't themselves made movies. So they don't know. And it's not that I want to stop people, but I'm like, the experience of watching a finished film has nothing to do with what it's like to make movies.
Mm-hmm.
And yet people think that it does. They're like, well, I know how to make movies. I've watched 2,000 of them in my life, or 10,000. I'm like, you really don't, because the process of watching a movie on the screen has nothing to do with how movies are actually made.
Yeah, I had a friend who's not in the movie business at all. He knows nothing about it, but he was telling me, how hard could it be? I watched Jaws 50 times. It looks easy to do. And I'm like, okay, go watch the making of on the Bluray.
Yeah.
And then tell me how easy it was. And it's just like, you just really don't get it until you're actually working on a set.
Yeah, it's so different. It's such a different thing.
Yeah.
And it's like the Matrix. You have to experience it for yourself. You don't know what it is until you do.
Exactly. So speaking of indie films, you worked on Tango Shalom?
Yeah, that's a film I worked on now. It's a film I produced and a film I've edited. We're now out there selling it. It's being looked at by various distributors. And that's a film I worked on and off. Again, a story of independent movies. The 2 guys that came up with the idea that are in the film, they put up the money, but it was over the last 4 years, they'd have money, and they shot it all. They shot it in about like 20 days. But finishing the movie, people don't understand post-production at all. And when I met them, I said they had no editor. They had nobody and they were looking for an editor. And a lot of people just don't, the bane of my existence is what I've told people about post-production. And I've said, look, man, if you want to make a movie, 33% of your budget has to go to post-production. And people are always like, what? That's not true. I'm like, okay. I know I've never made Star Wars or Jurassic Park or a Fast and the Furious movie. I'm just telling you what I know. And movie making is no different on the $200 million level as it is on the $100,000 level, because the process is the same. Sure, the $200 million movie is much bigger. There's a lot more process, but the actual act of collecting, shooting the shots, and putting them together is essentially the same. And nobody believes me. So these guys raised enough money to shoot their movie, but when we started editing the film, that was a whole different story. And we've had to and there's visual effects they needed to get done, which I
Wow.
post supervised for them, and so it's been a lot of work, but it's a delightful. I like to call it an indie Jewish spiritual quest family dance thriller fable.
Is that the
And
tagline?
yeah, that I know, right? The tagline, which I actually pretty much wrote, is Rabbi Moshe Yehuda is about to discover divine intervention can be rather unorthodox. So that's the tagline for the film.
Wow. Is there a Blu-ray or VOD date set?
Not yet, because we literally just finished the film about 2 months ago, right before clampdown quarantine started. So only a few people have seen it.
Wow.
And I'm really proud of it. But look, what's funny is my audience that watches my YouTube show or watches it's so far away from anything I've ever done. It's truly a family. It's a delightful family. It's a family film that anybody can watch.
Oh, so, yeah, I would love to see it when it
Oh, I
comes
can't
out.
wait for you. Hopefully it'll be on a streaming service and everybody can watch it.
Yeah. Okay, so it's that time to talk about the movie you produced, Dave Parker directed.
Yeah.
The Hills Run Red finally gets the 4K, or is it 4K scan?
It's not 4K. It's just regular HD. So it's a 2K transfer. Unfortunately, Scream Factory is just moving in. Well, they're not. Yeah, they are moving in. I think Event Horizon is their first 4K disc they're doing. But like Arrow, the boutique Criterion hasn't gone to 4K yet. Studio Canal has done four Bond films, four John Carpenter films at 4K. So it's a new thing for these boutique labels. So
yeah,
it's not 4K, but it's a great 2K transfer. I'm just happy to have it on Blu-ray on HD because I've only had the DVD.
Yeah, I think Shout Factory's first 4K was Deer Hunter.
They didn't produce that. That was done by Studio Canal, and I bought that. There's a 4-disc version of that came out a couple years ago that I bought.
Yeah. Okay, so for people who don't know what the movie's about, what's the plot?
Well, it's a horror film. It's a nasty little horror movie, and the plot is there was a director played by Bill Sadler, who people recognize as Death from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. He was in Shawshank Redemption. He was the villain in Die Hard 2. He's been in a million things. He plays a maniacal film director named Wilson Wyler Kincannon, who made a movie like in the 80s called The Hills Run Red that's supposed to be so scary and so violent, I guess you can't sit through it. But he disappeared, and so did the film. And so there are these two film aficionados that like special features and like Blu-rays and all that. And they have a line. Well, one of them, the main character, has found Wilson Wyler Kincannon's daughter, and she's a heroin addicted stripper, and he's going to go find her and hopefully to track down his father, because basically he wants to see the movie and make a documentary about it. And so he does that, and they set off to the woods where Wilson Wyler Kincannon has his house and his farmhouse, where he's apparently been continuing to make this movie in the intervening decades. And these fans, they leave with their girlfriend Serena to make this documentary, and Kincannon's daughter. So the four of them set out to go into the wilderness to find where Kincannon has lived off the grid for all this time, so maybe they can see the movie. And they don't realize that Kincannon believes in order to create his horror film, you have to really kill people. You know, I always talk about being the viceroy of verisimilitude on my show, but he's the king of verisimilitude. He actually believes in killing people for his art. And when our characters find his farmhouse, things don't go as planned. And really, it was sort of an homage to horror fans like Dave Parker, who directed it, and I. It was really, the main characters are us, which is weird because in Free Enterprise, the main characters are us as well. But in Hills Run Red, Dave and I we've made documentaries about horror movies and things, and these characters are doing the same thing. So it was very much, we totally identified with it. And we were going to make it for $350,000, and I was able to, through various connections, get it to Warner Brothers. And we made it with Joel Silver, who produced Lethal Weapon and Predator and Die Hard and all these other movies. And it was, for me, as somebody who wanted to produce a movie, it was an epic, epic victory for me. So Yeah, it was amazing. The whole experience was amazing. It's supposed to take place in like the Pacific Northwest. So we shot it in Bulgaria, which is where you could get a lot of bang for your buck. They'd built new studios there. I'd never been to Bulgaria. So yeah, so we were making this movie for $350,000. We flipped it at the studio, and then they're like, well, boys, we thought we'd be fired. They'd hire other people. And like, nope, Rob, you're producing, Dave, you're directing, and you're going to Bulgaria. So we did.
So what was that like shooting in Bulgaria?
Man, well, first of all, the people in Bulgaria are great. The crews are great. It was great shooting there. And it had been a Soviet satellite state, and it hadn't been free for very long. So there was still a lot of economic inequality. Like you'd see a gypsy cart, a horse-drawn cart on one side of the road, and then a brand new Lamborghini would drive right past it was really crazy. But the people there are amazing. They got great, hardworking crews. Everybody we met was delightful. It was a lot of fun being there, and I really loved being in Bulgaria, and I'd love to go back. Love to go back and make a movie.
Because I haven't seen it in a while. I actually was thinking about renting on VOD, and I'm like, no, wait, I want to wait till the Blu-ray comes out to watch it again.
You'll dig it because the special features alone, even if you don't like the movie, there's so much. I mean, we left no stone unturned. And I had taken my camera there because the studio wasn't going to pay for it, and I shot lots of footage of the behind the scenes that we finally got to use it all. And then Dave Parker, the director, went and shot new featurettes with people that were involved now. So it's a great package, I think.
Wow, that sounds great, especially for physical media lovers like ourselves.
Oh, they'll love it.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a special edition that's been this full blown in a long time.
I just love special editions the way they used to be.
Right.
Anniversary editions where they were packed with everything you could ever want. Now it's like they just release an anniversary edition in 4K and that's it. It's like, no.
It's such a bummer.
Yeah, there was
because there's no will anymore. The studios don't care. You know, before when DVD was a new format, special features, DVDs were making so much money that the studios were happy to make these full-blown special editions. And like, you know, when I was working on things like Lord of the Rings or Tron or the X-Men movies, they spared no expense, and you were able to create these great special features. And that day has kind of passed us by, which is sad. It's a bummer.
It is. And I remember Laserdisc.
I
used to own Laserdiscs and love the special feature. I would buy not even necessarily like the movie. I would buy lasers just for the special features.
Oh, me too. I've got about 100 I haven't parted with right over there, and I can't get rid of them.
Do you still have a Laserdisc player?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I do. It works.
Oh wow.
But you know, I have to say, a Pioneer Elite Laserdisc player, but I have to say, Laserdiscs look terrible because it's NTSC video. It's
analog.
It's analog, and it's standard definition, and it's just like, my God, you know, it's nice to have them. I even just like listening to them spinning up in the player, just the sound, and and Pioneer Disc would make that kind of sound, and which I loved, and that, but that's just nostalgia. When the movie comes on, I'm like, this looks terrible.
Yeah, I remember it back then when I first had it. I was like, wow, this looks way better than anything I could. And I remember when DVDs were first coming out, and I was dead set. I was like, that's not going to get rid of Laserdisc. Laserdisc is going to be far superior.
Me too. I'm like, you can pry my Laserdiscs out of my cold, dead fingers.
Exactly. With Hills Road Red, there's a few scenes that, if I remember correctly, one had shots of flowing water that was like blood.
Yeah.
And was there someone screaming it? I can't fully remember. It's been so long since I've seen it.
Well, that was actually a scene that was from the trailer of the movie within the movie.
Oh, okay.
And that scene was so much fun to film because we had 5 or 6 50-gallon drums of blood, fake blood. And then we had to build a platform. So we're in this little ravine, and we had to build a platform underneath. So there's a guy underneath the platform. So when the blood comes down, all 5 were poured down into the ravine. So there's like a wave of blood. And then when it's cascading over this one position, the camera position, the guy underneath in the platform that we built, the water's cascading over, well, the blood's cascading over him, and he had to stick his hand out, you know,
Yeah.
and there's a documentary that I made that was on the original disc where we have that behind the scenes footage. And Mark Villalobos from Monster Effects, they had to mix 5 50-gallon drums of fake blood. And it was so funny because, you know, people don't get it. When you're making horror movies, most of the time you're laughing because it's a hoot. It's so absurd. And the idea that we had to coordinate all these barrels had to be pushed at the same time to create the effect. I mean, it's like, you know, 1, 2, 3. And I was filming the whole thing, and it was hilarious. It was just hilarious because we only had one chance at this. No one was going to mix 250 gallons worth of fake blood again. It was that or nothing. And everyone's like all nervous, and this setup to it because we had multiple cameras, and the fake blood's coming down to the camera, and then there's a guy underneath a fake platform that we've built in the ravine. The whole thing was hilarious, but it came off great when you see it in the movie. It's like the final shot, and again, it's inspired by The Shining, the elevator shot when the blood comes out of the elevator. It was not exactly the same, but it was certainly inspired by that, and it was so much fun to do. And when it's over, I think I was like, wow, that was awesome. Like you feel like you're 8 years old because it's just like you've dumped a bunch of, and by the way, we had to make sure, you know, it's fake blood is usually just dye and water and some other ingredients, methacil or something, but we had to make sure that it was ecologically friendly. So not only is it in 5 50-gallon drums, it's green. Our red blood we were taking care of the environment, so it was green red blood, which I think is just it cracks me up.
That's funny. Yeah, I was actually on the set of Hatchet when it was being made, and it was the same way. It's like when you're watching it being filmed, it's like one part of your brain is saying, "Is this really going to work?" And the other part of you're just laughing, like, "This is just so absurd."
But what people I think what people don't understand is, you know, I call it the proscenium, but it's the frame that you're looking at. All you need to make things work is what's happening in the frame. So like we have all of a crew and they're all preparing the fake blood, but all we need is the water cascading down the ravine and the hand coming up. So you might have 50 people or more to get this one image. And
the shot only lasts like 10 seconds maybe.
Yeah, if that. I mean, and it's just such a funny thing. And it's but it's a collection of those shots. You might have to, a movie might have 500 shots, 800 shots, 1,500 shots, but each shot has to be perfect, you know, or at least close enough.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about movie making. It's truly like alchemy. I always say that great movies are like Rumpelstiltskin spinning straw into gold. So, yeah, in this case, look, it's not to everyone's taste. And when the studio saw it, they made us cut the movie. I mean, it was so far into the NC-17 realm. We went beyond the pale. I mean, there was some scenes, even and in the Blu-ray, they were never going to let us restore the scenes to the movie. But in the Blu-ray, not going to lie, we've dropped a few of the pictures, a little bit of footage. You're like, yeah, we're not going to say what it is, but
sneak it in there.
We snuck it in there. And of course, it's been 11 years, so the studio doesn't know.
Yeah.
Like, there's nobody at Warner Brothers that's like, well, wait a minute. You can't show that. And people are like, they don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And the practical effects in the movie, you know, that's one reason why I love gravitating more towards the indie circuit, because you have to do it practically. You have you know, and you can't just say, "Oh, we're fixing the post." It has to be done there. And you know, the practical effects. There were some pretty gnarly twisted effects with those heavy kills.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great where a guy gets his arm just broken, and the one effect. There's a woman that is chained up to. We called it the tree scene, and she's chained up like crucified in a tree with these hooks into her. And the tree is pulled down and it's going to snap. and the tree is cut, the wires or the rope is cut, and the tree snaps, and the girl that's chained up she's drawn and quartered.
Yeah.
She's just pulled apart. And I was like, I couldn't wait to see that physical effect, but I'm like, we just couldn't pull it off. So that scene is CG. I'm still proud of it because no one's ever done something quite like that before. And I grew up a gore hound. I'm sure now, what's really funny, I've been promoting the movie. I'm sure that there are people that are going to be saying like, this movie is so offensive. It's so rapey. It's so like not what I felt icky when I watched it. And I'm thinking to myself, all right,
It's pretty cool.
excellent. But there's a lot of people that the subject matters. It's rough.
Yeah.
And we had to cut it down. Like, if the people saw some of the things that we shot that we couldn't put in the movie, and at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, and Warner Brothers was thinking like, look, these discs are going to be in Walmart. What if some 15-year-old girl's like, I've heard that this movie's good. It's got 2 cute guys in it. And this film has degradation and rape and sexual violence. I mean, we had to tone it down.
That reminds
As much as I participate or believe in artistic integrity, in this case, if we had released the movie we shot, people would have still been coming after us.
Talk about some of the special features that's on the Blu-ray. What is all included?
Well, first of all, Dave, the director, he went and did interviews with like Dave Scow, the writer, and Dave Scow, who wrote the script, wrote like the first movie I worked on, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. He wrote The Crow. He's written a number of novels. He's worked on Frank Darabont's series Mob City. He worked on Freddy's Nightmares. And so we recruited him to rewrite the script. So there's an interview with him. There's an interview with our composer, Freddie Weidman. There's a really great interview with Dave, the director, and Dave Scow, the writer, and Eric Olson, who is the executive producer of the film working at Silver Pictures. Those were all done now. And there were also 2 other commentaries done now with other filmmakers today. Now, what I did, so that was Dave's half of it. So what I had to do was go back and delve into the tapes that I shot while we were on location. So in the first featurette that I did 11 years ago, you saw like one interview question, but I would do half-hour interviews with my cast. So what I did was I did these interview pieces, but they're not just interview pieces where somebody asks a question. I turn them into featurettes. So they're actually like 20-minute, 15-minute, 12-minute behind-the-scenes features. So the actors are interviewed, but then you get to, it's like a you are there experience of what it was like to be in Bulgaria on the set. So I did that with our main cast, and then principal members like Antonio Rubino, who is the, Antonello Rubino, who is the production designer. There's an interview with him. And then there's other pieces like we were actually shooting on Friday the 13th and we got rained out. So I did a piece with Dave on Friday the 13th. I'm like, take us around the set. What's going on? And then I actually work with, because a lot of the movie is a film within a film. So we had to go, and none of it was scripted. So we had to go improv with all the actors. So I would actually take them out and do like improv scenes with them. And so I did I didn't even remember I kept all this stuff, but I had all of their improv videos. Wow. So I did a piece called The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Improv, where I'm asking them questions like I'm in character and they're answering back to me, which I think is pretty unique. And no one's ever really done that before. And so, yeah, there's 6.5 hours of special features of brand new stuff. And it covers, I think, just about anything you could possibly want to know about the making of this movie.
Wow.
So it was a lot of fun to do. And where I'm talking to you now in my little Robservatory, I do all my YouTube shows here and I do whatever, but I edited all of that stuff right here.
Oh, wow.
So I had to go rent a deck that would play those old tapes, those HDV tapes. But they all look great after 12 years. They looked incredible. There were no dropouts.
Wow.
It sounded great, and it really turned out well.
That's nice. Yeah, I can't wait to see it. It drops June 16th, right?
June 16th, a week. Well, yeah, Tuesday, June 16th, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
I'm just happy it got released.
Yeah. and not just released, something like Mill Creek, where they just source, scan it from a different source, but it's actually, right. They put effort into it and money.
Oh, yeah. It. And they let us go crazy. I'm like, are we going to be able to fit all this stuff? and they gave us a BD-50, so we had enough room for the special features. So kudos to Shout and Scream Factory for doing it, because I think they did a really good job. They did a really good job.
Cool. Yeah. So when I get it, I need to do a review and let you see it.
Oh, I'd love, yeah, please review it.
Yeah.
I mean, the movie's not for everybody, and I understand that, but I think the DVD, the Blu-ray package, the HD package, is quite fun. And then I finished all of my special features in 5.1, which I'd never done before. I just did it for fun. I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway. And they mastered them in 5.1, which is pretty cool. I'm like, wow. How many special features exist that are in 5.1? I'm like, not many.
Not many
but
at all.
The Hills Run Red has them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, definitely can't wait to see that. Do you have any future projects you're working on that you can tell us about?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been working on I can't say what it is because it's unannounced.
You can tell
me. But it's an animated Netflix series. Oh, okay. And it's based on, I don't know if I can say it. Well, it's based on something else. And it is done in, think about, like, what is it, Castlevania that's on Netflix? Yeah. Think of it like that, but maybe better.
Okay.
More, and it's a period piece. It's a fantasy, epic fantasy. It's warring factions and dragons, and it's really neat. Cool. So I've been working on that, and I think it hasn't been announced yet, but I think it's going to drop at the end of this year on Netflix. And we're in the middle of, it's so weird. We're in the middle of season 2. They got a 3-season commitment from Netflix, 8 episodes a season, and we just finished episode 12.
Wow.
Which is just crazy. It hasn't been announced. Nobody knows it's coming out.
Wow. I know HBO sometimes does that, where they'll shoot 2 seasons at once. Man, that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I got that. And then I'm working on a movie I've wanted to make for over 30 years, which is sort of an epic science fiction fantasy. And one of the main characters is the devil, Satan.
Wow.
And Satan and the world's greatest political assassin. But it's and if I could get my dream cast for this movie right now, it would be Kurt Russell today. These are people I want to shoot with today. Kurt Russell, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Richard E. Grant. That's my dream cast for this movie. Wow. I mean, there's a lot more cast members in it, but those are the 3 people that I want to be in this film.
Come to think of it, I really haven't seen much from Michelle Pfeiffer in a long time.
No. I mean, she was in that movie, The Family, with Robert De Niro that Luc Besson was involved with. But I wanted to play the female lead in this movie. In a way, I really relate to Quentin Tarantino, how he just loved actors and would go find them and put them in his movies, whether it was John Travolta or Robert Forster, who he put in Jackie Brown. I feel the same way. Like, if I get this movie funded, I would just go pick all my favorite actors and put them in it.
Now, are you wanting to direct it or just produce? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, I want to direct and produce this, probably edit it. I mean, this is something I've wanted to make for a very long time. And I think now people would buy into it because it's fantasy and science fiction. I mean, it's epic fantasy, not like Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's fantastical. Mm-hmm. And with the subject matter, now that we've had shows like American Gods and we've had Lucifer, we've now come to grips with how can these characters exist in our world today. And I tried to make this movie after Free Enterprise was made 20 years ago, and people looked at me like I was insane. But I think now people get it. You know, like with Carnival Row, there's a place where fairies exist and fairy tale creatures exist alongside humans, or Once Upon a Time, American Horror Story. There's been all of these movies and TV shows that have primed the pump that will make the fantasy elements of this, the unreality, work. And I don't think that would have been true. The book came out a long time ago, and I don't think it would have been true when the book came out. People would have been like, wait, you want to have what? You have a human character is really the devil? Like, what? But now I think we're at the point where you can make it.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. I'm thinking, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, how, I know yourself, so into sci-fi, fantasy, all these shows, and you're always looked down on. like the nerd, like the geek, you know. I remember Simon and I, we're huge soundtrack score
Yeah.
fans, and our first score that we actually bought was Batman, Danny Elfman's,
Danny Elfman's Batman score.
yeah, and Back to the Future 2. What's funny is that before that, I would always hear the music, and I loved the music. And then when I went to Tower Records, and I saw the soundtrack, I'm like, wait a minute, you can actually own this? This is amazing.
Yeah.
and so we collected from everybody, James Newton Howard.
Oh yeah,
James
me
Horner,
too.
You know, and my friends would come over, you know, they were into Nirvana, grunge music, Pearl Jam, look at my CD collection. They're like, what is this?
Yeah.
What are you listening to?
I know. I mean, that was kind of the same with me. Before I liked rock and roll, I liked soundtrack music, because the soundtrack music, when you hear it, it would, especially if you grew up without, you know, before in the pre-video era, it would conjure up images of the movie. If you couldn't own it, you could live vicariously through a soundtrack and relive your favorite parts of the film.
Yeah, we used to go see a movie just based on the composer's name, who was composing that movie.
Yeah.
It was just great. And now I still think it's just so weird, because I go on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all these people know who composers are now and soundtracks.
I know.
And it becomes so big, and I'm like, wait a minute.
it's crazy. You know, you look at Hans Zimmer goes on tour, or Ramin Djawadi, or however you pronounce his name, from Game of Thrones, will go on the Game of Thrones tour and play all the music live. And you can watch videos of Tina Guo, you know, the girl who plays the Wonder Woman soundtrack, you know, when she does the electric violin, you know, and she shows up. She's like a sex symbol now, and people know who she is. It's crazy, but I think it's great too. It's pretty great.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I think the only time I actually saw a composer live was John Williams.
Yeah.
And he actually performed at the Fort Worth Bass Hall in Texas.
Wow, okay.
And we didn't actually see the show, but we were able to get into the rehearsal. So
we
got down on the ground floor, right up in front, watching him rehearsing the songs he was going to perform that night. And then he played a couple songs that he said wasn't going to be in the performance, but we wanted to play for those that are here. I mean, it was just amazing.
Amazing. No, it's amazing. And hearing that kind of music is, and what's funny is, I think, you know, on my YouTube show, I call everybody imagination connoisseurs. But I think when I was growing up, and probably it's the same for you, you know, you'd buy art books, or you'd buy movies themselves, you'd buy the soundtrack album. You had to have all of that stuff. Yeah. Like, it was all part of the same experience. Like, once you could bring a movie home, the videotape or the DVD wasn't enough. You had to have the soundtrack, and the soundtrack could exist on an emotional plane that the movie didn't exist on. And all of it was kind of the same thing. Like, if you loved a movie, well, of course I have the soundtrack. Like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
What'd you do?
What's wrong with you?
Yeah. And nowadays, I mean, there'll be people like, I love Alan Silvestri's Portals music from Avengers Endgame, but nobody's like buying the soundtracks. You know, you don't have.
Yeah. Or they buy just that track off of Amazon.
Right. Off Amazon, which is such a weird thing. Like, how would you, what? You didn't buy the whole album?
Yeah. And a lot of times back then, when I would say, do you like score soundtracks? Like, yeah, I do. But then I find out, I bring over the soundtrack and I play like Fetal Escape from Aliens or something like that.
Right.
And they're looking at me like, what is this? No, I like this stuff. And it ended up just being like the theme to Superman.
Right.
Instead of the actual soundtrack.
Yep. Yeah, I know.
And one of our favorites that we used to play over and over and over again was The Ambush, Clear Present Danger. James Horner.
That piece of music, that whole sequence, which, by the way, they recreated, paid homage to, in the new Jack Ryan series, the second season of the Jack Ryan series. That sequence is one of my favorite action sequences in any action movie the last 30 years.
Yeah. That
sequence is incredible. And that piece of music is incredible.
Yeah.
What a great sequence that is.
Yeah, we did a two-parter video after James Horner's passing. We did a two-parter video of James Horner's his whole biography from starting until his death. So before we let you go, I always ask this of all our interviews. if a young filmmaker or someone that wanted to get into the business came to you and said, Rob, what advice do you have for me? Something that you've been told yourself, something that you've learned, what would you tell him or her?
Well, when I was growing up, the technology, the tools that you needed to make movies were out of reach. They were expensive. Cameras, film had to be developed. It was expensive. Nowadays, you can shoot. Steven Soderbergh is shooting movies that are on Netflix with his iPhones, and it's easier than ever to have the technology to make a film. Now, that doesn't provide you with talent, and that certainly doesn't. Making movies is a long, difficult process, and it's not for everyone. People think I can do it in a day, but I would say this: that to anyone who wants to make a movie, I saw Spike Lee say this recently too, and with him, the Five Bloods coming out on Netflix, he said the same thing. You don't need to go to film school. You don't need to go anywhere. If you want to make movies, you now have the technology available to you at your fingertips, probably in your pocket. Nothing is stopping you from going out and making films. Now, are they going to get seen? I don't know. Do you have any talent? That's hard to say. That's all for you to discover on your own journey. But if you want to make a movie and put it up on YouTube and have immediate worldwide distribution, you can. And there's no reason why anybody who wants to make a movie shouldn't be making one. Although I would say you got to stick with it. It's hard. And there's going to be times you want to like throw your editorial software and the computer it's on out the window. But I would say just stick with it. And, don't necessarily swing for the fences yet. Learn your craft. I mean, I look at TikTok videos and there's some amazing filmmaking going on. There's no excuse if you want to be a filmmaker why you're not writing scripts and shooting scenes, because the technology is there.
Yeah. One thing I totally agree with that. And one thing I tell people when they've asked me is, number one, don't be afraid of rejection and don't take it personally. Because what you go up for, it's not because of you, it's because they feel that the project isn't right for what you bring. And if you quit, you don't know what comes the next day. Like I've had friends got rejected. And then I have a buddy who the next week got a job on Titanic.
Yeah.
Titanic. And he's like, best thing he could ever do was wait. And, and I tell people to learn all the trades. Don't just learn how to direct, learn how to edit. Right.
Yeah. Learn it all. And because you can be a one-man band now. I mean, Prince, one of my favorite rock musicians of all time, he could play all these different instruments and produce his work. I mean, I look at someone like him as analogous to what you can do now with a film. You can make your own stuff. You can make your own special effects. It's amazing what you can do now. You can do Hollywood level effects on your own. Takes a while, but you can do them. Yeah. So I think there's no excuse. If you have stories to tell, figure out how to do that. Figure out how to tell those stories, and don't be afraid to fail. I mean, you're not spending $100 million yet, so don't worry about. You can fix it in post still.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing the technology now. Back when we were 14, 15, 16, we would make short films with our home camcorder, and then we would edit by hooking up the camcorder to the VCR, to a little soundboard that sat on our laps, trying to edit it, trying to get it just right. It's just insane. And there was 2 movies that we made with our friends called Dark Passage and Hidden Measures, which I still have, actually. I found the old VHS tape, and I watched it the other day. I'm like, it's insane how easy it is now to edit, how to create a film.
Yep.
And so no excuse, like you said, no excuse not to.
Nope.
So before we go, let's tell people about your Robservation show.
Yeah, well, the late, great John Schnepp brought me onto YouTube back in April of 2015 on the show. It was AMC Heroes first, then it became Collider Heroes on the Collider Network. And I was with him and John Campia, who I do a show with 4 days a week now. And we talked about superhero movies and stuff. And so that's how I started on YouTube. And I did that for like 3.5 years. And even John Schnepp's like, you have an interesting perspective. You should do your own YouTube show. And I'm like, I needed more work. And then my girlfriend Elizabeth bought me a microphone for Christmas a couple years ago. Christmas in 2018. She goes, "Here, I want you to start your own YouTube show." So I'm like, all right.
She's
So
trying
I
to keep
did.
you busy. She's trying to keep you busy.
Yeah, out of her hair. So I started Robservations, the show about something, and people would say like, "Well, Rob Liefeld, the comic artist, just saw it." I'm like, "Look, man, I know he just started his show, but I've been doing. I just did. Well, I was gonna do my 438th episode today. I'll do it tomorrow, but I've done 437 episodes where I talk about something industry related, and then it's really all about building a community. I read lots of people's letters and comments, and I'm trying to create an online persona, an online community, just to share all the stuff that I love: movies, comics, action figures, physical media, books, whatever I love in the space. And I call my viewers imagination connoisseurs. And anybody is welcome. Every shape, size, color, creed, don't care. All I ask is that you're respectful to everybody else who's a part of the community. But it's all about sharing and talking about what's awesome, because we live in what I call the post-geek singularity, where all of our geeky things that we loved exploded and became the mainstream. I mean, that's why Endgame can make $3 billion.
Which I'm still shocked by sometimes. It's like
unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it's because everybody loves this stuff and everyone's grown up with it. And I think that we have a good community. So what I'm trying to do is share my enthusiasm for all of this and foster communication in a community where everybody who comes can join. And it's been good. I mean, I've been doing it for a year and a half, and it's getting bigger all the time. I think I just passed 27,000 subscribers, which seems small. And if you look at like PewDiePie, or you look at other people on YouTube, they have a lot more. But I think, my demographic skews older. They're not the typical YouTube demographic. So it's been fun. It's been nice. I've really loved doing the show, and I try and do it pretty much every day.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about your show is that you usually start off with some kind of article about the industry, about the company, business,
something to do with the industry, or something that I think is interesting from our perspective. But I never know what it's going to be. Like, usually before the day, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and I know that some people who don't know anything about the industry, they do become interested when you read the article and then you discuss it. And then they're like, "Oh, wow, I didn't know about that. Oh, wow."
Yeah, because I try and do that. I mean, I try and pick things. Like, sometimes I find stuff that's way inside baseball that doesn't appeal to people outside. But for the most part, I try and pick things that I think, because what's interesting to me is, even if you're not interested in filmmaking, the process of filmmaking is very interesting. It's very democratic. You have people from all walks of life and all income brackets who work on movies. So in a way, what I've always loved about working on sets is it's a microcosm of American life, or wherever you're living, whatever life that is. It's like your whole country. And so in addition to making these things, you also have this whole very talented crew of people that are problem solvers. And I love working with them. So I'm always trying to find something that has to do with the movie business in some way.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. For ourselves being filmmakers here, because there's some things that you brought up that I didn't know anything about, and then you said it was a little inside baseball. If you don't know filmmaking, you don't get it. But then you try to explain it the best you can.
Yes.
And that's what I like. And of course, all the letters you read are great.
I mean, that evolved. Like, I didn't know I was going to be doing that till I started getting letters, and the level of discourse in the letters that I read is really high.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always surprised at how smart my viewership is. And most of the time I'm getting letters, I'm like, this is really impressive. What a great question, or what a great comment. Some people write really long letters, but I read them on the show, and I like to discuss them, and I try and read everybody's letter. I really do. So I love that. I mean, I love that from people.
Yeah, and I know your audience loves it too. But there's one show that I know needs more viewership: Whining About Movies.
Yeah, I mean, that show was born out of quarantine. Like, we couldn't leave, and Elizabeth, my girlfriend, she has her own beauty salon. She cuts hair for a living. I mean, she's also a fine artist. Like, right now she's going to get her master's degree at Pasadena's very famous art center.
Yeah, I've seen her
design.
I've seen her work on Instagram, and it's amazing stuff that she does.
Oh yeah, she's amazing. And I said to her when she's out of work, I said, well, we should do a show, and she's never been on YouTube. And she's like, well, what kind of show are we going to do? And we talked about it. I'm like, well, what if we drank wine and talked about movies? And I would show you movies you haven't seen. And with your unique sort of non-geek perspective, you're just a woman. You're just pragmatic. You're mom, you're going to school, you don't look at these things the way I do. So it'd be kind of funny, I think, if you and I did a show together and we'll drink a bottle of wine and talk.
And she said, wine? I'm there.
Yeah. And we did our 38th episode. We did Fight Club last night. It was hilarious. That was a hilarious episode. And it's been a lot of fun. Like, I didn't know if it would work, but we keep getting more and more people watching. And it's been fun. I mean, it was born out of creativity, born out of circumstance. Like, we'll do this because what else are we going to do? We're stuck here.
Might as well. And it worked.
Yeah.
People
it was good. It's fun. Yeah. And she's gotten a lot better. It's been fun to watch her get better and talk back to me and have shtick and
get more comfortable in the camera.
Audience. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, last night you did Fight Club, and I saw your tweet. We're doing Fight Club. I looked at Simon. I was like, uh-oh, she's not going to like this one.
No, she did not. But that made it fun. I mean, I was like, let's do Fight Club because I knew it was our longest show. It was crazy. Normally we just do it for an hour. It went for 2 hours. I was like, all right, well, okay.
Yeah, I caught the end of it, and I did send you a message at the ending about that I saw it 3 times on opening weekend.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I just real quick story with this.
Yeah.
We were huge fans of David Fincher before he even, was nominated and
sure.
and everything. And so we saw Fight Club opening day, opening time. We walked up to the box office, said Fight Club. The box office girl looked at us, was like, "Are you sure?" Like, yeah. Okay. Well, you don't get your money if you walk out. We're like, no, we're good. So we go in there, loved it, went back the next day, saw it, and she's like, "You're seeing this again?"
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So we get in there, and there was a couple that walked in, boyfriend, girlfriend, they're on a date or something. And I leaned over to Simon. I'm like, that date's not going to last very long. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as it started getting into the second act, she got up, walked straight out, and he sat there for a little bit, and then he was like, shrugged his shoulders and just walked out. And I was like, I love that movie so much, but it's not my favorite Fincher film. My favorite is actually The Game.
Oh, I love The Game.
Yeah, I got the Criterion right when it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. But yeah. So I will put all the links to your show down below. And,
thank you.
And yeah, give them a follow, and I'll put a link up to pre-order Hills Have Run Red. Yeah. And yeah. Now
I'm excited. I mean, it was fun to be on the show. I really appreciate you reaching out.
Sure. Yeah, we've been trying to have you on here for a while.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. It was fun. This is great.
We'll let you go. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. And
100%, absolutely. I'd love whenever you want. I'd love to do it.
Say hi to Liz for us.
I will. Yeah, I will. And this was great. Thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here.
And yeah, we'll talk again later.
All right, man.
All right.